Grab some popcorn and a favorite chair. The love of movies is why we're here. Press play and don't delay. Let Phil be our guide to a cinematic day. Phil at the movies, from the silver screen to his podcast stream. Phil's covering every movie dream. Phil at the movies. Phil at the movies.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Phil with the Movies. I am, of course, your host, Phil, and you were listening to show number 183 of this ongoing podcast that is, you guessed it, for the love of movies. And man, oh boy, do I have a film to talk with you about today. 2025 has really been, in my humble opinion, a monumental year for movies. Whether it's Sinners, films like Eddington, Begonia, which I'll share my thoughts with you on that in a few more weeks, and now One Battle After Another. It has been timely, monumental movies, one right after another. And yes, I am playing on the title of today's film, pun intended. The movie that I just saw, One Battle After Another, the new film, much anticipated film, I might add, by director Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, newcomer Chase Infinity. This film feels timely to our current moment, our current political and cultural zeitgeist. It is a movie that is many things. It is a movie that is steeped in political revolution. It is a movie steeped in the very simmering fault lines between oppression and freedom. It is a film trying to explain the unexplainable, the world in which we find ourselves in, where things are spinning out of control and everybody is trying, or in some cases not trying, to do their part to make things better or at least workable. It's all of that. This film is all of those ideas, while at the very core, the foundation on which this entire film stands is a story that is as universal and recognizable across party lines, across political boundaries as anything else. And that is a story about family. I do not want to use the word masterpiece when describing this film. A, because it is overused. It has become a cliche at this point to describe a film that way. But B, and maybe I'm being a little overzealous here, but it's just my opinion, I don't think masterpiece is the proper word to describe this film. One Battle After Another is mesmerizing and magnificent. I don't even know if I am ready enough to articulate all of my thoughts and feelings on this film. I know I have to go see it again. That'll probably happen before the weekend is out. It's a film that has left me riveting. It is an engrossing tale that takes hold of you and manages to communicate its themes and ideas in a way that it's not being spoon-fed or beating you over the head with it, so to speak. But it takes all of these ideas and philosophies and sort of compiles it down into the confines of at what is in many ways a sprawling action adventure film. I think it is fair to say, and Paul Thomas Anderson has, to his credit, done a number of incredible films, from There Will Be Blood, Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, my personal favorite, Licorice Pizza. The guy knows how to make a great film. I think we may be looking at, with this film, this is his magnum opus. This is the one that he may be best remembered for. It's that much of an achievement. And it is a film worthy of celebration. I fully expect it will be an Oscar contender come award season. It's going to top many top 10 lists, including my own, at the end of this year. But all of that aside, all of the minutia, all of the praise, after walking out of this film tonight, not only did I say, oh, it's a great film, terrific performances, wonderful cast, gripping story, awards worthy, all of that praise, putting that all aside, I walked out of that film saying to myself, I have just seen a piece of cinema. Full stop. All right, now that I have set the stage for one battle after another, let me put out a quick disclaimer. I will be mentioning some plot points, so if you would like to savor the experience and go and see the film without the influence of my opinion or praise, totally understand stepping away from the podcast and returning at another date and time, because this is a film that I think you need to experience for yourself. You need to watch it. I'd recommend seeing it on the biggest screen imaginable, IMAX, just to take in the beauty of the cinematography, but also the scope of the film as well. But moreover, you want to go see this for yourself and to walk away with your own take and opinion on it. The film has been receiving tremendous praise. And I have to say, like, whenever there's a lot of hype going into a film, I tend to sort of get a little skeptical, maybe not fully skeptical, but like saying, well, maybe this could be a case of, people just sort of buy into the hype, and then that's the end of it. Sort of like a inflating of a balloon. It goes up, but then it ultimately goes down. I was pleased and delighted to not only be able to say, yes, this is a great film, but it was worthy of all of that praise and hype. And even then, I don't even think they sold it as high as this film goes. This is an incredible, monumental film. And it is a film that I think we're going to be talking about for quite some time. There's a feeling I have that this is a movie that will, as I said earlier, not only be in the awards discussion next year, but a film that will be in the same discussions as other great movies made this decade, such as Oppenheimer or Killers of the Flower Moon or Everything Everywhere All at Once, Nora. I think there's something about this film that it really does rise to that level of praise. And I'm going to circle back to Oppenheimer in a little bit, because I think this is an interesting comparison, these two movies. And I mean, frankly, make great double features at some point. But there's something that really struck me, and I'll tie that into the very end. So now that the stage is set, let me give you a quick rundown on the particulars for the film. Bob, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is a washed-up revolutionary who lives in a state of stoned paranoia, surviving off the grid with his spirited and self-reliant daughter, Willa, played by Chase Infinity. When his evil nemesis, Colonel Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn, resurfaces and Willa goes missing. The former radical and revolutionary scrambles to find her as both father and daughter battle the consequences of their past. So the film poses an interesting question. What happens when a revolution burns out? The answer: someone reignites the flame. And as a result of the flame being stoked, there are often unintended consequences. When we first meet Leo's character, his name is Ghetto Pat Calhoun, and he is part of this revolutionary group known as the French 75. He and Perfidia, a staunch member of the group who also happens to be his partner and the mother of Willa, they are active participants in this group's mission, from rescuing undocumented immigrants from detention centers to destroying government property. And ultimately, the group falls apart not when Perfidia becomes pregnant, though that sort of marks the change for Pat, where he sort of is wanting to settle down and have the sort of normal family life. Perfidia is committed to the cause and continues to take part in disruptive and violent actions, all the while they have their small baby at home. When she is ultimately captured by Stephen Lockjaw, who, of course, is sort of the nemesis to this group, she ends up betraying all of her members of the French 75, and that forces Pat and Willa to go into hiding and basically go off the grid for 16 years. Now, the interesting sort of backstory with Lockjaw and Perfidia is when they first encounter one another, she sexually humiliates him, and he ends up developing a fascination and an attraction to her. And at one point when he catches her, the way they sort of make an exchange is, she agrees to, meet with him for a sexual rendezvous at a motel, and they go about their separate ways. But of course, she ultimately gets herself in hot water where she can't be saved unless she turns on her fellow members. And so it's that sort of duplicity and sort of double agent action that ultimately ends up causing the French 75 to splinter off and go into hiding. Now, flash forward 15 or 16 years, Pat, now going by the name of Bob and raising his daughter Willa, who was originally named Charlene, he is a complete paranoid mess. And he is justified because, one, he has been looking over his shoulders for nearly 20 years, wondering if Lockjaw or the U.S. government is going to come breaking down his door. And it's also sort of the burnout effects of his being involvement in this revolutionary group. Now, flash forward throughout all of this time, Colonel Lockjaw has risen through the ranks of the U.S. military. He's become quite a prominent figure. Perfidia ends up being put into the witness protection program and then ends up fleeing to Mexico rather than sort of be under the thumb of Uncle Sam. All of that sort of makes the stage set for what ultimately transpires at the heart of this film. And it involves, of course, Lockjaw. Now, I just want to say something about Sean Penn because he is another incomparable actor. And here, he is a canker sore personified. I mean, it's such a gross and disturbing and horrifying performance. The guy is truly menacing in the movie, and it's a testament to Penn that he could make such a villainous character captivating to the audience. But his actions really do define much of the events that happen in this film. For example, there is some revelation that he is the biological father of Willa as a result of his sexual liaisons with Perfidia. Now, all of that is unknown to Willa, and in many ways it's unknown to Perfidia, but it is a central tenet of Lockjaw's story because, by the by, he has risen through the ranks of the military and has now been sought out by this group known as the Christmas Adventurers Club, which is a powerful secret society of white supremacists. So, yeah, you get the picture that Lockjaw is just a terrible SOB in plain English. And as part of his initiation into this group, he lies about having had an interracial relationship with Perfidia that resulted in her having his child. And so as a result, he uses his stature in the military to organize a secret raid on the small town where Bob and Willa are living off the grid. And it involves him coercing information from one of the former members of the French 75. And he uses this pretense as a way to try and go and cover his track. Also, he can be accepted by this group of shirt tuckers who are Klan members without the hoods for all intents and purposes. That's the trigger on which the film unfolds. And, of course, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Lockjaw converges on this town. He attempts to find Bob and Willa. Willa is fortunately plucked out of her high school dance by some ragtag members of the French 75, and they get her to safety. Bob, as a result, goes underground, literally, and works to try and find a way to reunite with his daughter. All the while, Lockjaw is in hot pursuit. And what ends up happening is a story of resilience where the daughter doesn't pay for the sins of the father, but learns from those mistakes, grows from them, and ends up becoming her own person and arguably a better person. There's a great contrast between the biological father in Lockjaw and the person who has been the father to her in Leo's character, Bob. And it's a wonderful study in contrast, where you ultimately see that it doesn't matter where you come from. There are some bonds that are stronger than blood, and you can chart your own course. And I love that for Willa in this film. And I just had to give a shout out to Chase Infinity. This is her first film role, and she is a revelation in this movie. An incredible performance. I mean, first off, her name is incredible. Chase Infinity. She already sounds like a movie star, but she has the talent and the chops to back it up. It's an incredible, raw, and just beautiful performance. And when you're going to go sort of up against or working side by side with Leo, you got to be bringing your A game, and she does that. So expect to see her name popping up many, many more times in years to come. I see great things for her because she hits it out of the park in this film. And of course, Leo, he is sublime as always. He never turns in a bad performance. This is one of my favorites that he's done because he's clearly having a ball with this movie, and it's fun to see him play the sort of burned out stoner who has to rise to the occasion and get his shit together. It's really a fascinating turn he does in this film, and again, tying it back to the story with his daughter, she's very much her mother's daughter in a way, that she's very much passionate about trying to make the world a better place, trying to stand up and fight injustice. And all of his overprotection, all of his attempts to sort of shelter her, in many ways were for nothing, but he's okay with that because ultimately she's choosing her own course. She's choosing to sort of go out into the world and try to make it a better place. And there's sort of that interesting symmetry going on here where both the parents sort of screwed up in their attempts to sort of, foster change, to have a revolution, if you will. But it's now up to the daughter to sort of pick up that torch and carry it on in her own way. And the way the film ends, Leo has sort of taken the reins off. He's no longer the overprotective father. She's charting her own destiny. She's going out to a protest. She's going to be kind of becoming politically engaged, becoming involved in the process. And it's just sort of a wonderful full circle moment where it sort of shows you that, yeah, the kids are going to be okay. The kids are going to be okay. They've learned from the mistakes of the parents. They've learned from the error of past generations, and they're going to go out and try to make their own change in the world as they see fit. In many ways, this film, despite all of its sort of political maneuverings and talks of revolution and sort of the dialogue between the tensions, if you will, the sort of the simmering Cold War of oppression versus freedom, all of that is sort of out there in the ether. But what the film ultimately boils down to is this story of hope, and how at the center of that is family, and that is the strength. Those are the bonds that hold us together. And if you have that connection, everything else is possible. And so this is not a movie where like, all of the shackles come off and sort of the walls come down and there's a dawn of a new age. No, if anything, there's sort of this message of endurance and continuation, but there is that glimmer of hope, and you see that in Willa as sort of this next generation, as someone who is going to go out there and chart her own course and try to put her best foot forward in ways that her parents could not, to try to clean up the mistakes of the past and write a new chapter in the future. I don't know. I just found it to be such an inspiring film in a lot of ways, even though it's loud and it's propulsive and the action is incredible and there's even car chases sprinkled throughout. I mean, there's so much going on in this movie, but it really is that distilling of family and hope, and it's utterly beautiful. It's utterly beautiful by the end of it, and it's that wonderful soul of the film, which is this dynamic between father and daughter, a burnout who does rise to the occasion, and then a young woman who becomes her own. I'm just mesmerized by this film because it is mesmerizing. It takes us on an incredible journey that in many ways, as I said, it's provocative. It's of the moment. It is speaking to this era of unease, uncertainty, of political unrest, but it's also about that flicker of hope, that shot in the dark, that you just keep going, you just keep fighting, you just keep persevering. And I mean, to me, that's the whole game. That's what it's all about. You keep going, one battle after another, one day after another. It just keeps going and going and never stops. And it's sort of a cycle that will, in many ways, never burn itself out, because that is the story of human nature. It's the story of the human spirit. And again, I don't want to oversell it, but I feel it's the best way to do it. This is like watching a piece of cinema. You've walked away, as others have with films like The Godfather, or as I've said before, with movies like The Dark Knight. You just know you've seen something truly special, truly monumental that we're going to be talking about for a long time to come. Now, I mentioned at the start the comparison with Oppenheimer because I really do think these two films are perhaps the most prescient and topical films of this era that we find ourselves in. And I think on the one hand, you have Oppenheimer, which is, yes, it's the story of the creation of the atomic bomb and J. Robert Oppenheimer's involvement in it. But the real crux of that story is the dangers of hubris. Pride goeth before the fall. And on the flip side, you have a film like One Battle After Another, which is, again, it's a story of epic adventure. It's a story of failed political revolution and power struggles and systems that are in place and changes within and outside that system. But it's also, you boil it down to the crux, it's a story about hope. It is the story of a strength. It's a story about family. And I just think putting these two films side by side, they offer a wonderful contrast, but also a commentary on sort of the American identity, the American spirit, the American story. And in the one case, you have Oppenheimer, which is really a tragedy in a lot of ways. And then on the other hand, you have One Battle After Another, which is this at times brutal and propulsive story, but one that always ties back to hope. And I think that's a wonderful symmetry there, kind of a wonderful call and response. I mean, I'll say it here right now. I think the two defining movies of this era that we find ourselves in, this decade, if you will, Oppenheimer on one hand, One Battle After Another on the other. And I think those are arguably two of the most important films made this century. Full stop. All right, I have probably bent your ear enough for today. Thank you for listening to this show. I told you there was a lot to say, and I still don't feel like I've really said all that I can on this movie. There's a lot to unpack, so I expect a future episode before the end of the year. But on that note, everybody, again, thank you for listening to today's episode. Appreciate each and every one of you. Now, please go out there, support your local theater, buy physical media, and I'll be back here next week where we'll do this all over again for the love of movies.
Feel at the movies makes every movie